It is a fascinating place, a young denomination from a traditional wine country, but today it is regarded as one of the best wine regions in the world. While its fame developed recently, its roots run deep and some of its vineyards are very, very old. Ribera del Duero was not taken seriously when it was still known for the production of rustic rosé wines, but today it is famous everywhere. And that is why I had to jump on a plane and check it out, and I'm of course taking you with me on the trip. Vámonos! In 1982, Michael Jackson released his album Thriller. The movie E.T. premiered in cinemas around the world, and it was the year when Ribera del Duero received its DO status. Ribera started off with only 9 wineries and only 8,000 hectares of vineyards, but it rapidly became one of the most famous regions in Spain, producing some of the most sought-after wines in the country. This might make you wonder why. Why was this place able to move past so many other established growing regions to get to the top? I asked myself the same question, and the best way to find the answer is to go there. This trip was made possible by the Consejo Regulador, so this video is supported by Ribera del Duero DO. I arrived in Madrid and drove up north towards Ribera del Duero. The region is located on the Meseta Central, the plateau that covers a large part of the Iberian Peninsula. The location and the high altitude are important factors when it comes to the climate in the region. Even though Ribera is only 250 kilometers away from the Atlantic, the climate is actually continental with Mediterranean influences, and the growing conditions are rough and marked by extremes. Annually, the temperatures range from -20 to +42 degrees Celsius, which means that the vines might freeze in winter and suffer from heat stress in summer. I layered my clothes as the mornings were usually quite cool, and it then heated up towards the afternoon. Interestingly, Ribera is one of the few regions where you can get frost right before harvest. The danger of frost is present throughout the whole year, apart from a few months in summer. The extreme temperatures are further accentuated by the high altitude. The highest plots are at 1,100 meters above sea level, and the sunlight is very intense there. I was squinting whenever I wasn't wearing my sunglasses. My first visit was at Dominio de Atauta. The winery is located at 1,000 meters above sea level in one of the highest parts of Ribera. Even though this is a remote place, it actually has a long history of winemaking, as evidenced by the historic winemaking cellars of the village that are not in use anymore, but still tell stories of a different period in Ribera. As you can see from the vegetation, Ribera is a fairly dry region, so the vines really have to dig deep in order to get to the water reserves. On top of that, it is a fairly windy place, and the wind further desiccates the soils and the vines. These extremes impact the character of the wine and help produce dark, concentrated, aromatic and structured red wines from the grape variety Tempranillo. It is Ribera's flagship varietal, and roughly 95% of all vineyards are planted to Tinta del País, or Tinto Fino, as the grape variety is called in Ribera. The wines from Ribera have a lot of personality. For me, the reds differentiate themselves from other Tempranillos by their dark color and intense aromatic. Because of the high altitude, the acidity just comes out better, and the tannins are more crunchy and a little bit more structured. There are other grape varieties that grow here. For DO red wines, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec and Garnacha can also be used. I was particularly fascinated by the white wines made from the autochthonous grape variety Albio Mayor. It was once widely planted, and it's still the most widely planted white grape in Ribera. Since 2019, you are allowed to produce white wines under the DO if you use at least 75% Albio Mayor, and I hope that we will see more of those wines because the best ones were really complex, elegant and refreshing. An interesting fun fact is that Albio Mayor appears to be one of the parents of Tempranillo, together with an almost extinct varietal named Benedicto. The region has many old vines and historic vineyards. Roughly 1/4 of all of the vines is older than 50 years, which is absolutely amazing for an old wine fan like me. And roughly 4% of all of the vines are older than 100 years, which is completely insane. Some of those vineyards are ungrafted / own rooted, as they grow grow in sandy soils in remote areas where the root louse phylloxera doesn't thrive. One winery that really focuses on those old sites is Dominio de Atauta. The winemaker Aimee Suarez took me to some of their vineyards that are spread out across the whole area. They work with several growers that farm small parcels, and most of the vineyards are really old. The oldest one is from the 19th century with vines dating back 180 years and still bearing fruit. In general, in Ribera, over 70% of the vineyards are harvested by hand, as many of those sites are not mechanizable and really difficult to reach with heavy machinery. Driving around Ribera, it becomes clear quickly that while the wines experienced a boom fairly recently, there is a long history of winemaking in the area. There are many historic winemaking sites, and there are also those really old tunnels that were used for the storage and maturation of wine. The cellars under Aranda de Duero are well known. It's here where you can find the Bodega de las Animas, a tunnel system consisting of more than 300 cellars that add up to 10,000 meters of tunnels. I walked through the spectacular tunnels at Cellar de Silos, a winery trying to revitalize a historic winemaking site. These tunnels date back to the end of the 16th century, and they are a great place to store wine, even though it is very difficult to work in those narrow tunnels. They are equipped with an old ventilation system consisting of shafts that go up to the surface. The openings look like little towers, and they are supposed to reduce the risk of goats or other animals just falling down into the cellar. Inside the cellar, the temperature is at a consistent 11 to 12 degrees Celsius all year round, and the humidity is pretty high, providing great conditions for the storing of wine. For most of the 20th century, the region produced blends of red and white wine, the so-called clarete, and there was only one winery that really had a world-class reputation. Or rather, for most of the region's history, there was only one winery, Vega Sicilia. Vega Sicilia was founded in 1864, first under the name Bodegas de Lecanda and then Hijos de Antonio Herrero. The founder Eloy Lecanda was either a great visionary or completely delusional. Maybe it was something in between, as he started a winery in an area where there wasn't any other winery. On top of that, he also imported grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Carmenère and Pinot Noir from France and planted them in Spain, where they were completely unknown. We don't know whether there was method to the madness, but the winery exceeded all expectations, becoming one of the most famous in the world, and Vega Sicilia's Único sells for more than $500 today. That is for one bottle. 0.75 liters. Vega Sicilia is an impressive estate, and I got to spend a few hours with Pablo Alvarez, the CEO and co-owner. I've been to many wineries, but this is one of those wineries where perfectionism really becomes palpable. It's equipped with everything you need in order to make a great wine. It's absolutely spotless, and they even have their own cooperage where they produce the barrels that they use in the winemaking process. They also use art on their labels, and Pablo Alvarez told me this little story about the time when he was confronted by the now deceased owner of Mouton Rothschild about the fact that Vega Sicilia might not be the first winery to do so.
Well, one time was here Philippine de Rothschild and told me, oh, this is a copy of us. And I told her, yes, but a very good copy.
The second winery that was established 63 years later was Protos in 1927. Even though back then they were not known as Protos, they were called Bodegas Ribera del Duero. In 1982, they kindly authorized the DO to use its branch, Ribera Duero, for the founding of the appellation and changed their name to Protos. The winery is now one of the big players in the region with 1,400 hectares of vineyards under their control. The new winery they recently finished is state-of-the-art, and the wines that they make are quite classical in approach. The styles that can be made in Ribera under the DO are red, rosé and white. All those styles can be made as a Conseja, Crianza, Reserva or Gran Reserva wine depending on the aging requirements. Red Crianzas have to be aged for 24 months, out of which 12 months need to be spent in barrel. Reservas have to be aged for 36 months, again 12 months in barrel, and Gran Reservas have to be aged for 60 months, out of which they have to spend at least 24 months in barrel. The aging potential for the red wines from Ribera is very long. At Val Duero, I got to taste their 1991 Valduera Antigua that sells for a couple of $1,000 US. And the wine was still beautiful, really bright and intense. There were obviously tertiary aromas, but it was by no means at the end of the road. And it tasted beautiful together with the lamp that they served at their own restaurant. Many of the winery I visited don't use the traditional terms for labeling the wines that are more related to the aging in barrel and in bottle. Instead, they just sell their wines as Conseja, as a vintage wine, and focus more on the origin, the terroir of the vineyard, trying to bottle different vineyard sites separately. This was particularly evident at Pago de Carovejas, where Pedro Ruiz and his team showed me around the estate. They really focus on bringing out the character of their different vineyard sites.
The clay, the similar soils is the typical soils in Ribera. It's more strong, is structure, and the limestone is the top part in the hills. Is more delicate.
Understanding the character of those different parcels is really important for them in order to understand how to improve the quality of their wine. Even though they don't always bottle all of those parcels separately, some of them are blended together, but they still want to understand what makes the different ingredients really special. This seems to be a general trend in the region, where in the past the wineries followed a Bordeaux model of making a couple of blends from their vineyards without mentioning the different sites. Nowadays, they really want to separate out their terroirs and make vineyard-specific wines. Spanish master of wine Pedro Ballesteros therefore compared Ribera to Burgundy. He wrote, "I like to present Ribera del Duero as the Spanish Burgundy, a long and narrow region with a single main red grape variety, which generates an infinite number of different wines depending on the terroir in which its vines grow." I don't know whether the analogy with Burgundy is perfect, but I can see his point, as there is a lot of diversity in Ribera. Overall, the region covers 26,123 hectares of vineyards, and it's still growing. There are more than 300 wineries that are located here, and around about 7,900 growers that farm tiny parcels and sell their grapes to the wineries. It stretches out for 115 kilometers from the east to the west along the Duero River that starts not too far away from here, and it flows into the Atlantic in Portugal. Its width varies between 5 and 35 kilometers. The region has clay and limestone soils. There's also sand and stones that were brought into the vineyards by rivers and general erosion, and the soil structure is complex. Master of Wine Tim Atkin also wrote that you could make the case of saying that they are just as complex as Burgundy soils. But it appears that the process of understanding Ribera soils has just started, and there isn't enough information available yet. One winery where the topic of terroir is extremely important is Bosque de Matasnos. Owner Jaime Postigo took me on a walk around the estate and explained that he didn't know much about wine when he first arrived.
We arrived here knowing about wine in the point of view of consumer more than producer.
Today they've established a holistic agriculture that includes the forest growing next to the vineyards, animals feeding off the forest, producing the manure that is used in the vineyards, and also for the production of cereals that is again used for the feeding of the animals. In this isolated area, they're also off the grid, creating their own energy and managing their own water supply. On top of that, he made a great paella for me at his home, where we sat, ate, tasted wine and talked. Visiting Ribera was a great experience as the region is complex and difficult to understand. It has pioneers, world-class wineries and new wave producers, which makes the winemaking scene really exciting, vibrant and a lot of fun. Even at a time when the wine industry in general is struggling, Ribera has a lot of things to look forward to. Even though its rise was fast and its success is pretty amazing, its winemakers continue to explore its sub-regions, vineyards and parcels in order to produce even better fruit. And in the future, I can see that wines will become even more precise, clean, fresh, and more vineyard specific. I'm certainly going to come back to taste more and experience more of that beautiful place. So thank you for watching. If you liked this video, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, what do you think about the wines from Ribera? Have you tasted them? What were your experiences? Let me know down below. But whatever you do, stay thirsty.